It's when you sing words, but you don't just sing them. They are real. They do what they're supposed to do. They are to make you react. And what I'm talking about, or we'll talk about in just a moment, is the choices you need to make. And a simple choice is you either believe these or you don't. I appreciate what Steve was doing this morning. There's no sitting on the fence anymore. There's choices to be made. We either believe it or we don't. Tonight, all I want to do really is give you just a brief potted history really of my background in order to bring a message that is about choices. But it also tells you about reconciliation, restoration, and grace, and forgiveness, and God's love. In doing this, I don't want to dishonor either of my parents, although the story has to acknowledge the challenges that we all faced for many years. This story, which I've only spoken of once, and some of you have heard that, but I've never spoken about what I'm about to talk about in public before, other than that time. It's a private story. So therefore, for some of you, it may well resonate with you tonight. It's not intended to be sensational, but it's a message of hope and healing. I was born in Rochford, which is in Essex, and I'm the eldest of 6 children. My mum became pregnant at the age of 16, and there was a decision at that time that they were to be married. So they were married. I was born in 1962, and my brother followed 11 months later, and 2 years later, my sister was born. So my parents were quite young with 3 small children. So for various reasons, the family broke down. And by the time I was 7 years old, there were 5 children. But the 2 youngest children were not my father's, although he gave them his name. My mother then began a relationship with another man and subsequently left my father and taking all the children with her. Life was chaotic, and by 1972, when I was 10, there was a 6th child, and we were living well away from my father and his family, and that we had very limited contact. My parents subsequently divorced, and my mother married her new partner, and it was decided that this man would adopt myself and my siblings. So this finally severed all contact with my natural birth father and his family. We then, a few years later, moved back to my original hometown of Southend-on-Sea. And life was meagre and cramped, cramped conditions, and we had little money. It was around this time that my family attended evangelical meetings, and they were run by a well-known preacher then called Trevor Deering. My uncle had recently, as well before this, gone to Australia and had found Jesus there and became a Christian. And on his return back to the UK, started witnessing, obviously, to his mother. And as a result of his mother then attending these meetings, she too found Jesus and became saved. And as a result, obviously, the whole family started to attend these meetings. And gradually, one by one, the family all became Christians. But this is a really important development, as this new faith would be the one thing which would stay constant and consistent and reliable in my life, given the events which were to follow. It was around this time that the situation at home began to change again. My stepfather began to target myself and my siblings, and abuse began to take place, which went on for a number of years. He was a prolific offender, targeting not only the children in the family, but children of the neighbours, and also the babysitters who looked after us from time to time. And for whatever reason, my mother did not intervene, and this was not something which we ever discussed, even between us as siblings. At the age of about 16, 17, I really believed that God was calling me to Bible college. And at the age of 18, I went to Ealing Bible College for 2 years. This took me away from my family situation and gave me a secure and nurturing environment. And I received promises from God at this time, and some of which I am still yet to see come into fruition, but which I have been reminded about regularly as time has passed. But whilst at Bible college, the extent of the abuse happening at home all came out in the open. And by this, my 15-year-old sister had become pregnant and had a baby boy. Our stepfather was subsequently prosecuted and imprisoned and for a short while. When he came out of prison, he was allowed to live back in the family home. He was later imprisoned some years later again for further offences, and eventually my mother did divorce him. During my last few years, though, at Bible college, I met Helen. And once I finished that and I went back home, I then decided to move up to the West Midlands, leaving my family situation way behind me in Essex. I began the road to healing and restoration with the help of my in-laws and the church at Eve Lane, and still holding on to the promises that God had given me. When Helen and I had married, I decided to invite Lionel, that's my birth father, to the wedding. He was also remarried and had 3 children. And this was the first time I had met him since I was a young boy. Lionel and I had some tenuous contact over the next few years, but nothing substantial. But a few years ago, Helen developed her contacts with Lionel via Facebook, and they began to have some short conversations, and this slowly began to be more established. Lionel took interest in our children, and then he and I began to have contact. After about 12 months, after general contact, I had an out-of-the-blue call from Lionel. Conversation basically was, did we want to meet? I took this opportunity and had a real peace about it. Despite wondering how it was going to go, I'd only met this man once in the previous 40 years, and much had taken place over those years. And after all, he had signed me away to a man who was to abuse me. But in those days, it wasn't unusual for men to get, would have been unusual for men to get custody of their children. And maybe he just felt it would be easier. My life may have been very different, though, had I lived with him and stayed with him rather than my mother, who didn't have the capacity for full care and the ability to protect us. Of course, I had 101 different questions, and on the 3rd of March 2013, I took Helen and the girls, and we travelled to meet my father, also his wife and his eldest son, Matthew. But as we arrived, we saw him coming down the driveway to look for us, thus reminding me of the father in the parable that looking down the road for his lost son. The years fell away, and it really genuinely was like we had only met last week. So we talked, we laughed, we found many things that we had in common. And afterwards, Helen commented that anyone observing us when we were out at lunch would not have had any idea of our previous history, or that we weren't just a normal family. Because in fact, that's exactly how it felt, normal. So over the past 3 years, I proved that despite some very poor choices on behalf of both my parents, there did not have to be a disunity, but there could be restoration. I have chosen to pursue the relationship with Lionel, and he came to Millie and Ben's wedding and took his place as a grandparent. And last month I received my first birthday card in 40 years, but this time signed Dad. I'd also had no rift with my mother. There was no animosity. She struggled, though, just to have a relationship with me and took no interest, really, in my children. but I had to learn to accept this. My mother died in April 2015, but I'd hoped that when she realised that she had cancer and it was terminal, that she would make more effort in building this relationship with us. Although we supported her as much as we could right to the end, there was no significant change. But we put this partly down to the controlling aspects of her third husband. You see, my mum didn't make good choices, obviously, when it came to men. But however, I am satisfied that I will meet her again in heaven. Grace, well, this is the heart of the gospel. Grace is given even when it is undeserved. Forgiveness, it is not optional. If I want to live in the light of God's love and the fullness of his promises in my life, I need to choose to dispense grace. And actually, because of the way things had happened, because this was the work of God, that was actually very easy. I'm a man, therefore, of two legal fathers. One signed papers and walked away from me to start a new life. The other abused me. My mother failed to protect me and had very little emotional connection with me or my family. And my siblings have had various problems, such as forming relationships and issues of depression and substance misuse. Therefore, statistics would say that I should be a rubbish dad and husband. But friends, I'm totally the opposite. In addition to a lovely family, God has given me a deep-seated sense of the Father's heart, even though I had never experienced the Father's love. Such is the healing which I have received. This is not my own strength, but wholly and completely a testimony of faith, restoration, reconciliation, forgiveness, and love. So tonight you might identify with elements of this story. Maybe not about abusive relationships or poor parenting, but there may be other hurts, there may be other elements that you can relate to, which may even be because of your own poor choices. But folks, there is always a way back. This doesn't mean that the person who hurt you should be in your life. This may not, because it may not even be safe. And the man who abused my family should definitely not be in our lives. And he isn't legally allowed to anyway. But it doesn't mean that I have the right to hate him. You don't have to live with the hurt. You don't have to be defined by it. And you don't have to wear it as a badge on your jacket. You don't have to live as a victim or use your hurts to justify your own behavior. God, our Heavenly Father, knows who you are. He knows the plans he has for you, and he has the means to make all things new and make a way. He always makes a way. Folks, that's my potted history, but it's exactly what it is, history. The Bible speaks of God giving back the years the locusts have taken, and my life story is about how God has turned my history into my future and how he is restoring those stolen years. And I experienced that through his love. I don't take for granted his love. I don't for a second feel that I'm ever without his love. You see, the moment I made that decision at the age of 12 to hand my life over to him, to surrender completely who I was and be changed by only his grace and his mercy, I now know that his love and his grace continue to heal me. You see, on top of all the other wonderful blessings he has given me, he's given back my Father. So finally, if this has spoken to you tonight, what are you going to do to forgive yourself or others so that you can see the grace and restoration in your life? Just remember, it's your choice. But the best choice that you can ever make every day is to allow God to take your life, perform his will, through you and use you for his glory. May God be blessed.